Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Nasdaq Dorsey Wright podcast. Today is Monday, March the 29th. I'm Jay Gragdani, and here joining me is Sara Maley. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Sara, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, thanks, Jay.
It's hard to believe, March 29th, that we are almost completely done the first quarter of 2021. It seems like just yesterday that we were in the midst of the COVID-19 correction in the market. Nonetheless, we are now a year past the anniversary of the market bottom. Back happened in late of March 2020. Certainly, a lot has changed. The way that we interact, the way that we communicate. Technology has allowed us to continue to operate in this manner, and we're certainly grateful for that. We're grateful for everybody here on the call listening to us. Today, what we wanted to do is have a discussion around specifically the technical attribute rating system that we have on the Dorsey Wright research platform. And I'll share a quick story. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot that has changed in the markets, as well as in personal lives. And one of the things that changed here recently in our personal life at home, specifically with my son, got his very first gaming system, and it was a Nintendo Switch. And so that happened around Christmas time, and he has gotten big into one game specifically, Rocket League. It's apparently, as I'm learning each and every day, Rocket League is a very, very popular game. He talks about it with a bunch of his friends, a bunch of neighbors. They can play online together. Nonetheless, we were sitting there last night after dinner, and he was explaining things to me and how you do this and how you do that. And I got to ask, I was like, so who makes this game? So I started doing some research, found out it's a company called Epic Gaming. So I asked them, I said, so are they public? Are they a public company? Can you buy their stock? And he kind of looked at me and said, what do you mean buy their stock? And so that set into a whole nother conversation. Now my son is 8 at the time. So just to put that in perspective, so we had a whole conversation about what a stock is and how you can buy stocks, and his mind was just blown that you can invest in companies and own companies, and it was remarkable, and so it was a proud dad moment for me at that point. And then I got to thinking that my son Jacob actually sat through a presentation I gave one time up at Columbia University. So apparently that presentation did not sink in with him at the time. It took a couple of years for that to sink in, but nonetheless, it was a very interesting conversation, a very interesting discussion that we were having. And then he asked the question. He said, so how do you know what companies you want to buy, what stocks that you want to buy in there? And that led into a whole nother discussion, a discussion that is very near and dear to our hearts around technical analysis and around technical attributes, specifically on individual companies. And so we started looking at some charts and some stocks, and looking at attributes on our website. And so with that, the technical attribute rating system is something that we provide for every single stock on our system. And so what we wanted to do today is provide an overview of what that technical attribute rating system is, how it's constructed and calculated, and ultimately why it can be important in not only understanding which stocks that we want to own, but also understanding when it might be time to move on from some of those stocks. So with that, Sara, I would love if you would come in and kind of give an overview about what those attributes are, and specifically what we're looking at when we calculate this.
Sure. So as Jay said, there are 5 attributes that we look at for all stocks. So a stock can have a rating from 0 to 5, with 5 being the best. And the first attribute that we're looking at is going to be overall trend. So is the stock trading above or below? It's in a positive or negative trend. So is it trading above the bullish support line, or is it trading below the bearish resistance line? And if it's trading in a positive trend, we always say 1 point, or one technical attribute counts positive there. The next 4 data points are going to come from the relative strength side of things, 2 from market relative strength, and 2 regarding peer relative strength. So what that means is we're going to look at, for market relative strength, we're looking at a relative strength chart comparing the stock in question versus the S&P equal weight index. And we're looking for the signal and the column. So first, if we need to see this particular chart be in a column of X's to count positively, and then we would need to see that chart be on a buy signal to count positively. And that what that tells us is the buy signal is a signal of long-term strength versus the market, whereas that the column is the long-term, while the signal's more of a near-term indicator. So that just tells us that if both of those things are positive, then our stock is showing outperformance or showing strength relative to the market on a near-term and longer-term basis, which is something that you want in your favor. And then the other two indicators or 2 points for technical attributes are going to come from the peer relative strength chart, which is calculated just like the market relative strength chart, except for instead of looking at the market, which again we define here as the S&P equal weight index, we're looking at the peer relative, a peer index. So an index made up of peers within the same group, and we're comparing the stock versus that group index to make sure that what we own is showing long-term and near-term strength. So again, the signal is going to be an indicator of long-term strength, and the column, a column is going to be more of a near-term indicator. So again, 0 through 5, they're all spelled out across the top of a trend chart. We note the trend, the 2 market relative strength data points, again, the signal in the column, and then the 2 peer relative strength data points. So with those, we prefer, we say a high relative strength name is going to be a 3 or higher. That stacks the odds in our favor, as we like to say. And if something starts deteriorating, or if you start to see a stock downtick from maybe a 5 to a 4, it's raising a yellow flag. If you see something maybe move from a 3 to a 2, like we did recently with Amazon, when we saw Amazon violate its bullish support line, that's where we want to start evaluating those positions, especially these low attribute names that are trading in a negative trend. So the 3 or 5 or 3 or 3, 4 or 5 rule, we do like to see 3, 4s and 5s, and I think ideally we would like to see those in a positive trend as well.
That's right. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, we want to own the stock of companies where a majority or the weight of the evidence is positive. And that's the idea with that 3 or higher piece there is we want to be able to stack the odds in our favor as much as possible. And I think it's important too, when we're talking about technical attributes and really technical analysis, it is evaluating the price action of securities over time. So it is as important as fundamental analysis is in answering the questions of what companies we want to own. The technical attributes and technical analysis would come in and answer the question of when do we want to own that stock, or ultimately when do we want to sell that stock, in the case of some names that may be breaking down there technically. So that's something important to keep in mind as we're going through that. A couple other points too. In previous podcasts, the past couple of weeks, we had a discussion in last week's podcast about relative strength in general, and the sports analogy of the NCAA basketball tournament that is still currently going on right now. And then the previous week too, Sarah, you mentioned the S&P 500 equal weighted index. The S&P 500, there's a number of different ways that index is constructed. The one that most are familiar with, and the one that everybody talks about, is the S&P 500 cap weighted index. But there's an equal weighted index version that takes all 500 companies and simply equal weights those instead of giving the bigger weights towards the larger companies within that index. So that was the previous week. If you wanted a bigger discussion on either one of those 2 topics, the topic of cap weighted versus equal weighted S&P 500 index, or a deeper dive on relative strength, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at some of those. But it allows the investing process to try and remove as much emotion from the equation as possible by utilizing something like a technical attribute rating to identify individual stocks that we want to own. And I say that because if you go in our website and look at all the stocks on our system right now, at least all of the U.S.-based stocks, some globally, but certainly all the U.S.-based stocks, is every single one of those has a technical attribute rating assigned to it. So if, depending on how you go through your stock selection process and looking through ideas, you can take a fundamentally sound list of securities and then screen those by their technical attributes to identify which of those fundamentally sound companies, the what, is also a good time in terms of buying the why or the win of the technical attribute side. So you can screen all of those. So it's very much unemotional in nature in terms of how those attributes are put together and how those attributes are constructed. And there's actually some studies that we've put out there that with a white paper that was published by Chuck Fuller, did it on our team, that just talks about kind of more of the numbers behind that, and some more evidence out there that just shows how higher rated attributes have historically shown the ability to outperform lower rated attributes over time. So maybe that'll be a topic for a podcast discussion down the road, but there certainly is a lot of evidence out there. And Sara, I know there's been a lot changing in the market right now in terms of leadership trends that have been changing, as value stocks in general have come back in favor generally over growth, as small caps have been performing well. What's a great way on the website to either stay on top of or identify the technical attribute of a specific stock?
So as Jay said, every stock is going to have that attribute rating attached to it on our system. And, one of the easiest ways that I particularly like to go and screen for high attribute names, which I do on a daily basis when I'm coming up with stocks to write individual comments on, is just utilizing the security screener tool underneath the security selection menu. And once you're in there, you can click on Run Stock Screen, and this will allow you to simply run a screen for all the 5s, all the 4s, all the 3s, but then you can add that additional criteria on top of it. So maybe optionable only, or maybe you there's a price requirement if you're looking for something with a higher yield. But you do have the ability in there to say, I want to see 5s that or, in a positive trend, that maybe the trend is flipped positive within the last 3 weeks. So you can, look for names that way. You can also look through the database reports, and you can sign up or, for any stock that you want. You can turn on an activity alert so that you can get an email if the attribute rating has gone up or down, or you can even break it down by if you want to know when the trend's violated or when any of the relative strength metrics change. But if you just wanted the blanket, want to know when it changes from just in general, you can turn on the breakout, the change in attribute report, So that, again, that's under the activity alert. And you can just click on that, the set alert button off of any chart, and that will turn on your email alerts. And for example, I'm looking at the chart here of Alcoa, or at least I was, here we go, Alcoa. And we can see that this chart is a 5 for 5er trading in a positive trend, showing, long-term and near-term strength versus the market and its peers. And one neat thing on the individual charts is that you'll actually see the dates that those things flipped positive. So I can see just by looking at Alcoa's chart, it's been trading in a positive trend since November 9th of 2020. It gave a market relative strength buy signal May 2020, and it moved to a column of X's here not too long ago on February 22nd of this year. Same with the peer metrics, moved to a buy signal in March of 2021, and that moved to a column of X's back in February of this year. And you can also click on the attribute rating itself, which has a new look on our site. It's now going to be color coded. So if it's a 0, 1, or 2, it's going to be red. And if it's going to be, if it's a 3, 4, or 5, it's going to be green. Now we've made that attribute reading a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder. And you'll see that there is a white arrow next to them that just says the last move of the rating itself was either up or down. It's not telling us that the stock itself is going up or down. But for Alcoa, we see that it's a 5 for 5er, arrows up telling us that it moved from a 4 to a 5. And if you actually click on that 5, you can go back and you can see the history of the attribute ratings over time.
That's great. And, as you look through the history of those, it's not that like when these attributes change, that it's a very short-term thing. I mean, these things tend to be longer-term and tend to point towards longer-term strength or weakness. And very often, as you go back and you look through individual stocks, a lot of times what you'll find is if a stock moves up to say a 3, it'll rise to a 3 and maybe go up to a 4. It may back off to a 3 and back up to a 4, maybe up to a 5. And so it'll bounce around in that strong attribute range for quite some time. Similarly, on the other side, when stocks fall below 3 and hit 2 or lower, you very oftentimes will see those stocks bounce around between 0 and 2. And so that's the cutoff there. But it's very interesting to go back and historically see how some of these attribute changes have trended or tended to trend. And it's also very interesting to go back and see how long some of these attributes can remain a positive attribute stock. I mean, for years, you've seen a lot of these large cap growth names have been strong attributes. It might not have been fives the whole time, but they might have been fives and back to fours and back up to five. But for years, and you mentioned, Sara, earlier, Amazon is one that has recently downticked, and you're seeing a lot now that have fallen down towards that 3 range and close to moving down potentially to number 2. So that'll be something to continue to keep an eye on, specifically now for this market environment as we're closing up the first quarter of 2021 here in just another couple of days.
Yeah.
So
Jay, actually, one stock, actually, sorry to interrupt, but one stock I actually just found. We were talking about those attribute ratings staying intact for quite some time, and it made me think of Danaher, which has the longest running market RS buy signal on the system. It's had that buy signal since June 9th of 1993. And so I just went back. It's a 3 for 5 right now, but I clicked on that attribute history, and it only downticked to a 2 for 5 briefly for a few months, or actually it looks like for all of 2009 or 2010, it was a 2, but ever since 2006, it's really maintained a 3 or higher, which is pretty interesting to see here, especially since that buy signal was given. It looks like that market buy signal was given. There's only been, 4 instances, 5 instances that this actually has moved to a 2, and it doesn't look like it's fallen any lower than that. So, that's not all the case with all of them, but it is interesting to go back. And I think the attribute history tells a story maybe that just looking at a chart, won't tell you.
That's right. That's fantastic. Well, with that, Sara, thank you for joining the call this week. Thank you all for being on and listening. If there's any questions that you have about technical attributes specifically that we talked about today, or anything else that we can help with as it relates to the Dorsey Wright methodology, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our phone number, 804-320-8511. You can also reach us via email, dwa@dorseyWright.com. So with that said, thank you all for joining, and look forward to talking to you next week.